Welcome, everyone, to the Information's TITV. My name is Akash Pasricha. It is Wednesday, June 3rd. First up on the show today, a new wave of announcements out of Microsoft's Build conference. We'll break down all the new models, agents, and quantum chips and more with our Microsoft reporter who is at the event. We'll then get to Marvell's skyrocketing shares after Jensen Huang's glowing endorsement. And we'll also bring on our politics reporter to unpack the White House's AI executive order. We'll then unpack OpenAI's decision to combine Codex with ChatGPT and how customers are most likely to react to it. And finally, we will end the show with our Meta reporter who broke the news that the company is limiting some of its employee tracking tools. It's going to be a fun show, so let's get right on into it. Microsoft unveiled a staggering number of new products at its Build conference on Tuesday. There were models, chips, agents, and more. To unpack all of it, I want to bring on Aaron Holmes, our Microsoft reporter, who is at the event. Aaron, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you here. Where do you want to start? I mean, what was the biggest release for us out of all of them?
I think the most significant thing that Microsoft released was these 7 new models that were all, trained from scratch by Microsoft. And specifically, they showed off a new coding model, which is going to go in their GitHub Copilot AI tool, as well as a reasoning model. And I think what was interesting about these is that Microsoft said that, once you are able to sort of customize these models to your company's needs, they can actually be more useful in some cases than leading models from Anthropic or OpenAI at a fraction of the cost. Obviously, we need to wait and see whether customers agree with that evaluation. But if it's true, that's a pretty compelling pitch that Microsoft is making to developer customers. And then, on top of that, there were a slew of other announcements ranging from new kind of OpenClaw features within Windows and Office and new devices, and sort of across the board, Microsoft making this push to essentially be a place where companies can use AI in the workplace and, according to Microsoft, in a way that is cheaper and also potentially more trustworthy than AI from foundation model labs.
So Microsoft is saying that these models will be cheaper than what's out there in some cases. With the agents that they unveiled, are those included in the bundles that they already have? Is it something they have to pay extra for?
Yeah, so on agents, it's still a little bit unclear how they're going to be priced, but there were a couple of announcements. So one is, Microsoft said that they're going to release this product called Scout, which is essentially OpenClaw, which is this open source agent tool with, a sort of wrapper around it that makes it more trustworthy and, according to Microsoft, will prevent it from going rogue with your company data. And as I've reported, that's something they've been working on for several months. They promoted this corporate vice president Omar Shaheen to specifically build OpenClaw tools for Office, and this was kind of the first real look that they've given at what that will look like. And so, the idea is that Scout can function like this autonomous OpenClaw style agent that is just basically monitoring your Outlook inbox all the time, or your team's messages, and will suggest ways to reschedule meetings that conflict with other things, or will send you reminders if you ask it to when you're about to go into a meeting with what you need to know. It's also interesting, whether companies have a strong need for always on agents like this. I think is a little bit untested, but Microsoft is definitely trying to capitalize on some of the developer hype that we've seen around agents like that.
On the always on piece, did you get any sense from Microsoft or from the presentation how they might plan to control the costs that customers might incur with this? And I ask this because this is the risk with these types of agents is having a budget for token use, and then basically running through all your tokens without even knowing it because an agent is on in the background. Did they address that at all in the presentation?
That didn't get too much airtime, although they did kind of point to these tools that they've already previewed called Agents 365, which is essentially software that's meant for companies' IT departments to keep track of, how employees are using agents, and also potentially put controls onto how those agents are being used. And, as we wrote earlier this week, a lot of companies are starting to essentially throttle how employees can use AI agents to make sure they aren't chewing up too many tokens and running up the budget. And Microsoft didn't really get into this explicitly because I think they would love, companies to spend heavily on
And more.
agents
But
potentially.
what about the customers on the ground? I mean, what was the general reaction from the customers to all this?
I think developers who I spoke to were definitely curious to test out these new coding models and agent tools. I didn't hear too many specific use cases for the OpenClaw style agent, but I did hear, a lot of folks immediately saying that, these coding models, especially, and the reasoning models could be a big deal when used in their applications. And Microsoft is starting to make those available in a limited preview. So we'll have to see kind of how they play out directly in the enterprise.
Okay, let's go to the handheld devices, the operating system for these devices. This was kind of interesting. It wasn't something that I think we were expecting, although I don't know, maybe you've heard this and maybe I just missed it. What was your reaction to that?
Yeah, no, it was interesting. So Microsoft, showed off these prototypes of potential reference devices that could use this new operating system that they've built, which is essentially meant to run on, smart devices. So smart glasses, handheld badges, little desktop touchscreen consoles. And the idea is Microsoft wants to basically sell this operating system to device manufacturers so that people can use those devices to talk to Copilot or to any other AI agent to remotely control, their meetings or other pieces of software. And it's interesting because Microsoft actually showed a physical prototype of one of these devices. And at first, a lot of people thought that that meant Microsoft was going to start selling this device. It was a
Right.
handheld badge. But I've confirmed they don't have any plans to actually sell a device themselves. They're essentially, hoping that OEMs, meaning manufacturers, will step in and start making these devices, and they can just sell the software layer.
That's like such a downer. Like it's a bit of a tease, right? It's like you bring out this handheld device. I mean, they're in the business of Xbox. It's not like they don't know how to make devices. I kind of wish that maybe they and by the way, then OpenAI would have really started panicking then because then they would have said, "Are you serious? You're doing those too?" But
Well,
okay, fine.
my understanding is that Microsoft is very aware that OpenAI is moving into this market, as are lots of other AI companies. And I think that by essentially, stepping into this race a little early and saying, we don't have devices, but we are building the software that would power such devices, they're starting to plant their flag in what they know is going to be a very crowded space in the coming years.
Right. Last question for you: the desktop computers that were unveiled from Microsoft. It felt like this was an extension of the news we saw earlier this week. Microsoft and Nvidia, they unveiled this chip together, and I mean they described it as what, like a data center that is available on your desktop. Is that the idea?
Yeah, so this is called the Dev Box. It's part of Microsoft's Surface line, which is their in-house PC line, which up until now has mostly just been tablets and laptops. But this is a desktop box. It's roughly the same size as like a Mac Mini, and I think very much competing for the same types of customers. And I think the idea is, this is going to be powered by the new NVIDIA processor. It can run pretty, mid-size AI models locally on your own device. And the idea is that, by spending to buy this device, we don't know how much it'll cost yet. But spending on this top tier hardware, you can then save costs by running more AI locally instead of having to pay per token, which kind of factors into this broader pitch that Microsoft is making to developers, which is essentially trying to give them more flexibility to control the cost of AI rather than just relying on foundation models from OpenAI and Anthropic.
Right. Well, Aaron, I want to thank you for coming on. That is Aaron Holmes, our Microsoft reporter at the Build conference here on TITV. Marvell shares closed yesterday, up more than 30%. They are continuing to ride up today after Jensen Huang dubbed it to be the next trillion-dollar company. Meanwhile, there have been a flurry of other chip-related headlines over the past few days. Microsoft, at its Build conference, also unveiled its latest quantum chip. We'll get to that in a minute. Intel is also shipping a new inference-focused chip. And so to break down all of that news, I want to bring on John Vinh, semiconductor analyst at KeyBanc Capital Markets. John, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, let's start with Marvell. So Jensen Huang has dubbed it the next trillion-dollar company. Does John Vinh agree with that?
I think when Jensen said that, I don't know if he really meant it literally. I think he meant it figuratively. We know he has a very high opinion of Marvell, right? They recently signed a strategic agreement in which Nvidia invested $2 billion in Marvell. I think primarily to secure, networking capacity over the next few years or so. So obviously, Marvell is very important and a strategic partner to Nvidia. We think Marvell's a great company. We have an overweight rating on it. But in terms of the specific comment, I think it was more a figurative comment than a literal comment from Jensen.
So sounds like you don't think it can get to $1 trillion.
Um, I think right now would be kind of a stretch, right? It's market cap is about 250 billion right now. So for it to get to a trillion, it would be a
Right.
fourfold increase. So that might be a little bit of a stretch.
Now, remind us, Marvell, where does it fit in the chip ecosystem? It's squarely in the networking chips game, so competing with Broadcom. Is that the idea?
Um, it fits in a couple of areas, right? Networking is really the area where it excels. It acquired the optical interconnect business from Inphi. It also acquired Celestial AI, which gives it access to next generation direct optical connect technology, which is increasingly more and more important as you see networking proliferate through the data center. And then on the other side, they also have a very competitive AI ASIC business where they compete with Broadcom on the custom ASIC side, and then they also obviously compete against some of the merchant suppliers such as Nvidia on the merchant GPU side for AI, and also AMD.
So, I mean, where does Marvell have its own traction then, and where is it really fighting headwinds in this? I mean, look, I know any chips in this day and age is good, but I guess what I'm wondering is, what is the case to invest in Marvell over investing in a company like Broadcom?
Yeah, I would say where it has traction today is AWS uses their AI ASIC services for Trainium. They also are going to be providing or building the next generation ASIC for Microsoft. You heard them announce and talk about the traction they're getting with Maya 200. Marvell is actually helping them build Maya 300, which is going to ramp next year.
And which Myo 200, 300, which chips are for those of us who aren't as familiar with them?
Yeah, Marvell's helping him with the next generation Maya 300. Maya 200 was discussed yesterday at the Build conference.
Which is what? What type of chip is that?
It's a custom it's a custom AI ASIC.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So okay, sounds like there's some traction there. Um, Speaking of Microsoft, I do want to ask you though. So I mean, that was one announcement that they talked about yesterday. I want to ask you about the quantum chip that Microsoft announced yesterday, the second iteration of it. What stood out to you about the differences here with this quantum chip, and how bullish are you on that?
I think the quantum market in general is extremely early days. I think we're all trying to get our arms wrapped around, what are going to be kind of the killer applications around it. Obviously, all the major compute providers and ecosystem partners are actively evaluating their quantum strategy. Certainly, Microsoft is obviously, moving the ball forward there, but I think it's still pretty early days in terms of assessing what and where it fits going forward.
So when you hear 2029 as their goal for a commercial quantum chip, do you think they'll get there by 2029?
I I think it's a possibility. I don't think it's out of the question. I think just the bigger question, as I mentioned, is just how widely adopted is going to be in 2029.
Right, and then I guess, I mean, where my head is going is that IBM is also squarely in the quantum game, and I think they've set a similar timeline for 2029. they've invested, something like $10 billion in this initiative. Um, I guess I wonder how you think about the competition in quantum, if there is any right now for such an emerging field between IBM and Microsoft.
Um, Certainly, it's a very disruptive technology. I don't know if we have enough information and details to assess where they stand versus each other, but certainly, it's something to keep an eye on.
Right. Okay, let's move then to Intel, and I'm kind of chugging through all the chip headlines that we've seen over the last a week or so because there have been a couple here. So Intel is launching this new inference-focused chip, Crescent Island. Can you explain to us what exactly is different about this chip and how it's planning to stand out?
So Crescent Island is an AI GPU. Um, they have previously released GPU products before. They haven't gotten very much traction with it. So Crescent Island is kind of that next generation chip. I think it was, announced on the roadmap from Intel a couple years ago. Certainly, my observations, if you look at Crescent Island, in terms of Intel's strategy, there's two things that kind of stand out to me. One is they're focused on the inferencing market, and the second thing is they've chosen to use LPDDR DRAM instead of HBM memory, right? And that makes sense to me, right? It's really hard to compete with Nvidia on the training side. Nvidia just has a stranglehold there, and that's kind of where they're initially trying to target getting some traction in the market.
And put that a little more simply for us. I mean, higher level. What is the a lot of acronyms there. Just break down for us simply what the whatever you just said was.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So, most AI chips on the market use a type of memory called HBM, which stands for high bandwidth memory. It's very expensive. It's usually about three to four times more expensive than traditional commodity DRAM. The memory that Intel is using in Crescent Island is LPDDR, which is stands for low power DRAM. It's a similar type of memory that is used in smartphones, such as your iPhone. So it is significantly less expensive. It consumes lower power. That's the main difference between the two types of memories that are being used here.
And so why has Intel opted for that approach here?
I think two things, right? I think one, they're trying to focus on inference. So when you're focusing on inference, the need for HBM memory is lesser. And then cost wise, right? It's obviously not going to be able to compete with Nvidia on a performance basis. So by using low power DRAM, it lowers the cost of the chips and makes it just more cost competitive.
Hmm. And so, in terms of who this is competing against, this is Intel's newest crack at an AI GPU. Where does this? I mean, do you think this is a viable challenger to Nvidia? Not in the sense of taking significant share, but is it a product that you think people will take seriously and look to, in this uh, supply shortage of GPUs that we have?
I I'm I'm somewhat skeptical of that. I think in this market, if you look at the major providers, right, on the merchant side, it's Nvidia, then you have AMD, and then on the custom ASIC side, right, it's Broadcom and Marvell. I think the AI chip strategy for Intel is very much a work in progress. We very much like Intel's stock, but for other reasons such as foundry and advanced packaging. But I think the AI strategy for them is a work in progress. I think their sweet spot right now in terms of the data center and AI, in terms of where they have good traction, is on the agentic AI workloads, where there's more of a need for traditional server CPU architectures, where they're kind of an entrenched incumbent there.
Now, there was an interesting interview that the FT had with a top Intel executive talking about the playbook for this chip, and one of the things that they mentioned is that they are assessing whether or not they could sell this Crescent Island chip in China, and maybe that is an opportunity for them in an environment where Nvidia and AMD have kind of been closed out of the China market. Does that feel like a viable future to you? Could you see that happening? Does that give you any more confidence in Intel here?
I think a lot of that depends on just the geopolitical relations between the US and China. We did see recently that the US government had approved Nvidia to sell its H200 GPUs into the China market, right? So the H200 GPUs is a lower performant chip that's been cut down um, so that it can meet some of the requirements to sell into the China market. I would imagine that the Crescent Island GPU would be similar in performance to the H200. So assuming that geopolitical relations continue to normalize there, then yeah, I think that could be an opportunity for them. But I don't know if the China market over the longer term represents kind of a viable market for Intel or anybody else at this point.
So, last question for you, John. I want to go back to what you were saying. You're slightly skeptical of this chip and how effective it'll be for Intel, certainly with respect to the AI GPU opportunity. What inevitably do you think happens here with this effort? I mean, you think they launch this chip, does it kind of just putter along, and then if it doesn't get traction, they discontinue it? Do you think this is ultimately going to be an area that Intel invests even more into over time? Play this out for us a year or two down the line.
Yeah, I think it's part of the learning curve for them, right? I think they're gonna, take it to market. I think they're gonna put it out there. I think they're gonna try their best to get customers to adopt it. And then I think they're gonna get some feedback on that. And then I think they're gonna try to iterate. If you look at their strategy, Intel is approaching this AI market on a number of fronts, right? It's got its foundational core with server CPU, which, as we talked about, they're entrenched there.
Right.
It's an up and comer on AI ASICs and on merchant GPUs. They're also partnering with Nvidia on the chiplet side, right? So they've announced kind of a partnership agreement to integrate their x86 cores on a chiplet basis using NVLink to some of the Nvidia GPUs. So I think if you're Intel, you're going to continue to integrate. I think you're going to try to move the ball forward and figure out what sticks. And then in the meantime, in the background, they're getting very good traction with advanced packaging, which is going to be a really core part of the AI chip ecosystem because increasingly we think more and more hyperscalers are going to use their advanced packaging, which is eMIB-T, to integrate high bandwidth memory, which we talked about as an essential part of developing a custom AI ASIC chip for these hyperscalers.
Great. John, I want to thank you for coming on. That is John Vinh from KeyBanc Capital Markets here on TITV. The White House has released an executive order on AI and cybersecurity guardrails, though it's not exactly the executive order many thought was going to be released last month. To break it all down, I want to bring on Leo Schwartz, our tech and politics reporter. Leo, welcome back to the show. It is great to have you here. What is in this executive order? Break it down for us.
Yeah, it's good to be back. It feels like I was just here talking about the executive order, and honestly,
When it was delayed, it was we were so close, and then it didn't happen.
it was delayed at the last minute. There was supposed to be this big, fancy signing ceremony at the White House with tech executives that didn't happen. And instead, 2 weeks later, we got basically the same order. Not much has changed. There's one small difference, which is basically this controversial component of it where AI companies would have to or could share versions of their models with the government before releasing them to other partners and then the public. It used to be up to 90 days before release, which was untenable for a lot of companies. Now it's up to 30 days. Besides that, the order is largely the same and makes clear to denunciate, including in an entire paragraph dedicated to this, that it is voluntary, it's not mandatory, it's not a licensing system, but at the same time, it does create for the first time this federal regulation that's compelling companies to be sharing their models with the government ahead of release.
So, what do we know about why that change was made, and any kind of a backstory as to why that part was taken out?
The backstory here is that the Trump White House, when he came back into office, was very much opposed to any regulation with AI. There was the accelerationist wing led by David Sachs, the former AI and crypto czar, that said that they would not impose any of these safety rules from the Biden era onto AI companies. Of course, then Mythos came onto the scene, and this threat of these advanced cyber models that could create all sorts of risks for financial sector or hacking or any other things that could happen. And that caused this new wing to come into the conversation. People from the intelligence community, people like Secretary Scott Bessent of the Treasury Department, who began advocating for more safety requirements, or at least some degree of regulation that would help rein in these frontier models before they were released. The reason that the bill or that the executive order was canceled last time is because you had this last minute call from Sachs to Trump, as well as I think Trump just sort of going back on this idea that any regulation could potentially hurt the US's lead over China on technological innovation. What we saw come out with this final order that Trump signed in secret yesterday, not in a big flashy ceremony, is a compromise. So it still does create this voluntary framework, but instead of encouraging companies to release their models to the government 90 days ahead, it's only 30 days. So it's sort of a middle ground, although it still is unclear what the White House's approach will be moving forward.
And I mean, I want to pick back on that piece you just ended with. It's unclear what the White House's approach will be going forward. That's sort of where I was left, digesting the news yesterday, because uh, it wasn't a flashy ceremony. It was something that was done quietly, and it almost feels a little bit to me like they had to get something out there, but they're still trying to figure out exactly what their stance is. And this was kind of like a kicking the can down the curb a bit. Like, we're not going to make any big swings just yet publicly.
The more interesting dynamic now is there is this split within the White House where you have, I would say, the more accelerationist camp against the doomer camp, or maybe put more nicely, people advocating more for safety versus those advocating against stringent regulation. This bill that we have is really a middle ground, although it doesn't create that much in terms of requirements for what AI companies will have to do. And certainly as models grow more advanced, this doesn't seem like it's really going to solve any of the issues that they could pose. There is a whole other section of the order, which is the same as leaked versions that came out over the last few weeks, which basically beefs up cybersecurity systems within the government, whether through hiring or, again, working in these voluntary programs with AI companies to try and find any potential cybersecurity risks or violations. But at the end of the day, because this is an entirely voluntary program, it remains unclear what's going to happen as frontier models become more advanced. And you are seeing the safety wing of the White House certainly get more power. But what came out of this seems like it's more of a stopgap and not a permanent solution.
So this is what's going on within the White House and its AI executive order considerations. What are the broader questions that you're trying to find answers to about how AI is being considered, not just at the White House, but across the government right now?
So the biggest degree of movement is happening in the states. We just saw Illinois pass the most sweeping pro-safety AI bill. We've seen bills come out of California and New York. They're being considered in other states. Of course, this is one of the biggest fears of the Trump administration and a lot of both Democratic and Republican Congress people who don't want to see a patchwork of bills coming out at the state level. But we do have this perpetual gridlock in DC. There has been no bipartisan framework that's been worked out in Congress, even though there's been attempts. Right now, there is a bill framework that's being worked out between two Congress people, Representatives Obernolte and Trahan, but it seems unlikely anything will pass, at least during this term, at which point you're just going to continue to see bills come out of the states, and all that's coming out of the federal government is basically these executive orders that won't have that much power.
Right. Leo, I want to thank you for coming on. That is Leo Schwartz, our tech and politics reporter here at The Information. OpenAI's Codex has been on a tear lately as it gains favor with developers, and OpenAI is using that momentum now to combine it with ChatGPT. My colleague Stephanie Palazzolo has the inside story on that decision, and I want to bring her on to talk all about it. Stephanie, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you here.
Hey, great to be here.
So, Codex is like better than Claude now? Is that the idea?
Well, I wouldn't say it's as simple as that, but definitely from our reporting and the story that we published yesterday, we have seen that a lot of developers in recent months, especially since OpenAI came out with its Codex desktop app in February, have been switching over to Codex, which is, OpenAI's kind of coding and general purpose agent versus Anthropic's products like Claude Code and Claude Cowork.
Okay, so Codex is getting some traction. How is OpenAI capitalizing on that then?
Yeah, so as the company announced yesterday, there has really been this big push towards combining Codex, ChatGPT, and other OpenAI products into a single desktop app. So this is something that OpenAI has been working on for a couple months now, and it sounds like they are gearing up to release this so-called super app in the upcoming weeks. And so basically, from the developers and OpenAI leaders that I spoke to, the company has realized within recent months that the software behind Codex is actually much better at, not only coding tasks, but also any sort of, knowledge work tasks you might ask an agent to do. So writing emails, looking at, Google Docs, looking at spreadsheets, editing spreadsheets. Codex is basically better at all those things compared to ChatGPT. So the company has basically been saying, all right, if we know Codex is better, why not bring the Codex capabilities inside of ChatGPT, which obviously is used by, over 900 million weekly active users at this point.
And when you say that the back end is better, are you talking about like is it a different version of the model that is powering Codex that is better for ChatGPT-esque tasks? Is that the idea or?
Mhm. So historically, like there have been points where ChatGPT and Codex are using kind of different models, but what I've heard is, I guess maybe just to break this down, when you have something like Codex, you have the underlying model, GPT 5.5 or whatever number you're on at that point. Then you have something called a harness, which is basically all of the software around that model. So this is a software that helps the model, take actions on your computer or use a browser or go into your email and look at your email. So this is kind of the software that really helps the model be useful to the user. And essentially, what I've heard is that because at OpenAI, within the Codex team, they were building the model and the harness at the same time under the same team. Those two things really worked super well together versus ChatGPT and many other products at the company. The models and the products are actually being built under separate teams. So maybe
Hmm.
the models are being built under research, the products are being built under the applied team. And so in this case, because they were able to build that model and that harness together, it just made them just like a dream team, apparently, according to developers that we talked to. And so that has really kind of made the Codex uh, app a lot better at, longer running tasks. So things
Hmm,
that
hmm.
might take hours instead of minutes, or really complex tasks where you might be working with numbers within a spreadsheet and you need to be able to write code and all these sorts of things.
So when we look at then how Anthropic has developed Cowork, and I know that within the Claude app, I mean, because this is different if you're on PC or on Mac. I have a PC. I know on Macs you're supposed to have Claude and then Claude Code, and then Cowork. They're like separate tabs basically within the one application. Um, is this at all OpenAI's answer to Claude Cowork, or is this not really jumping into the agentic territory? It's really just unifying the product. It's more of that.
So I would say that you're correct. They're definitely taking a page from Anthropic's playbook. I think essentially OpenAI has seen the success of Claude Code, and then coming off of that coding specific tool, Anthropic came out with Claude Cowork, which is this more general purpose kind of agent. And I think OpenAI saw that and they were like, wait, we also have similar capabilities. We've also been really focused on coding models. Like, why don't we do something kind of like that? And so now I think they're looking at, Codex, which is coding specific, and they're saying, okay, how can we expand this and make it more broad and more for just any sort of knowledge worker, whether you're an investment banker, a salesperson, a
Right.
journalist, anyone.
But it doesn't have agentic capabilities just yet, does it?
So it actually does. So there are, a bunch of things that you can do with the Codex app. So um, you can connect it to a lot of the apps that you use. So you might connect it to your Gmail, to your Google Drive. So it can actually go and like write emails for you or create files within Google Drive or check your Slack messages. There's also this other feature called computer use, which basically means that Codex can, spin up a little browser basically within the app and, click around in the browser and basically just do anything that you might do in your browser. So maybe you wanted to like check LinkedIn to see who has recently left a company or test out an app or website you just made to make sure it's working well. So there actually are like quite a bit of, agentic
Right.
capabilities within.
And there's I mean, I also saw that it's supposed to be like a browser too, because they're baking Atlas
Yeah.
into it as well. So, well, look, it is nice to see that they are starting to consolidate their product teams into one, because I think this is one of the biggest concerns that we have talked about on the show is the extent to which the product portfolio is too sprawling. So I think that is certainly a smart decision there. Did you learn anything about the business impact that Codex has had on OpenAI, or how this might affect what they're expecting in terms of projections, or hopes for growing that 900 million users? What did we learn there?
Yeah, so I would say information here is fairly sparse. In terms of usage, Codex did recently pass 5 million, weekly active users, which that is up from, 4 million about a month ago, and then 2 weeks before that, 3 million. So usage is definitely growing, but even though we know the majority of those users are paid, there still is a really, big chunk that are not paying users. And so it's not really clear, how much that's actually adding to revenue. We do have a couple interesting little details in the piece we published yesterday around, Greg telling OpenAI employees last month that recently Codex revenue from enterprises had been growing 50% um, month over month, or sorry, week over week. And also Sam telling employees as well that the app had been, growing super quickly. I think it was 5% day over day in terms of usage. So if we extrapolate that growth rate out to a month, that'd be, growing over 4 times in a month. Um, so we do have these like tiny little details showing that like revenue seems to be growing, usage seems to be growing really well, but
And what about the customers, the users? Did you get a chance to talk to anybody about their reaction to this? Are people happy about this?
yeah, no, a lot of developers seem to really like Codex and said that it had really improved, especially since the beginning of this year. I think the main improvements there were some of the most recent model releases, especially GPT 5.5, which they said made it a lot better at, longer running tasks. A lot of people really loved the app, which, makes it easier to work with Codex if you're like a non-technical user, like I am, for instance. In general, what I kind of heard from a lot of developers is Codex is really good if you have if you have a set plan going in and then maybe it's a very complex task and you need to be able to trust that whatever coding agent you're using or agent in general is able to follow that plan very, very specifically versus some people were saying that Claude Code is better whenever you come in and you don't really know what your plan is. You're like, okay, I want to accomplish this general goal, but I don't really know how to go about that. Because Claude Code maybe for some developers is better at like making those reasonable choices itself and deciding, like, what to do in a certain whenever it wants to achieve a certain goal.
Right. Great. Well, Steph, I want to thank you for coming on. That is Stephanie Palazzolo, our AI reporter here at The Information. The Information has exclusive reporting that Meta is limiting some of its employee tracking tools after pushback from a number of its staff. I want to bring on our Meta reporter, Jyoti Mann, to share with us what she has found out. Jyoti, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. Yeah, so Meta is actually making changes to its employee tracking tool called the Model Capability Initiative after receiving feedback from staffers who raised concerns about the system.
Okay, so MCI. This was an acronym you used in the piece. MCI stands for what exactly?
So MCI, sorry, is Model Capability Initiative, the
Okay.
internal employee tracking tool that it rolled out in April in order to teach its AI models how to use computers.
And so the idea here is what? That Meta literally tracks what their employees are doing on their computer and then uses all that behavior to train its AI models? Am I saying that correctly?
That's right. So MCI tracks an employee's keystrokes, mouse movements, and how they use computers, and it pulls in data from more than 200 apps and websites. And it's only currently rolled out to employees based in the US, and it has safeguards in place to protect capturing sensitive information.
And has there been pushback from employees about this? I mean, I I gotta imagine some people weren't very happy about this, right?
Absolutely. I think almost immediately after the announcement was made, employees reacted to the news or the post which made the announcement with shocked or angry emojis and comments. And then shortly after, a petition was created by some staffers, and it had been circulating internally for a few weeks while gathering signatures. But it was actually sent to leaders last month, and it had gained more than 1,500 signatures from employees.
So 1,500 signatures. So the result of that is then what we saw in your reporting. I mean, they seem to have taken some action. I do see though that from your reporting, it's limits employee tracking. It's not stopping employee tracking altogether.
That's correct. So, as part of the changes, employees will now have the option to pause the tracker on their computer for 30 minutes at a time to do things like checking something personal. But staff who were working in sensitive areas were already exempt from the tool. So now Meta's expanding the exemptions to employees who work remotely and might be concerned about bandwidth usage affecting their internet bill, for example, or those who perform field work. And some of the other changes involve strengthening the privacy protections. So the tool is no longer kind of capturing the exact words an employee is typing, but it would sort of summarize the activity captured. And it now only a handful of engineers have access to the raw data collected through MCI.
Are employees satisfied with this? Do you expect there to be a push to still, continue to roll back these tracking tools, or are people pretty happy with what they have?
Well, almost immediately after we broke the news about the changes to the tool, the petition organizers shared a new statement with the information, which called Meta's decision to soften MCI enforcement rather than to abolish it entirely insufficient and unsatisfactory. They said their views on this matter haven't changed and that they still demand and will continue to demand CEO Mark Zuckerberg and the leadership team to scrap MCI entirely and immediately forever.
Can I ask you a question? Is this only a Meta thing? Is this happening in all tech companies? Do we know if this is like an industry standard or if this is like literally only a Meta phenomenon?
Sure. Well, Meta's not the only big tech company using their employees as a source of AI training data. Microsoft has been collecting data from its in house coding application, which developers use to write software. It's also been compiling the source code of video games developed by studios owned by Xbox, for use in their training of AI models. And meanwhile, at XAI, managers reportedly have been offering employees $420 apiece to donate their tax returns, as well as returns from their friends and family members, to use as training data for its AI chatbot Grok.
And it is kind of interesting to me. And you published as part of your story, you published excerpts from what Zuckerberg has said to employees about the rationale for tracking employees, and he referenced all these contractor companies, that these AI labs will use to get data on how to basically information to train their models. And I mean, the point he was making was that we pay all these contractors. You guys are smart enough. Why don't we just use you using the applications to collect the data rather than paying it out? So, I mean, there certainly is a business case here. Although, again, I'm not sure that I really support the idea of tracking employees' behavior altogether. Jyoti, I want to ask you, what do you think comes next in this story? Do you expect there to be additional petitions, like you said, more pushback? Does this issue ultimately just get scrubbed under the rug now that they've addressed a little bit of it? What do you think happens next?
I do think we'll continue to see further pushback, possibly in the form of like a quiet resistance. So, after MCI was initially rolled out, we reported that some Meta employees had been resisting the tool by ignoring the accept button on the pop-up for the tool, permissions pop-up for the tool that appears on their screens. And one employee actually told me that they had discovered ways to temporarily disable the software through their settings. So again, I suspect that we'll see that quiet resistance continue, with some employees possibly opting to use the 30-minute pause on the tracker repeatedly throughout a working day.
Yeah, that's I think smart is, just put the timer, just keep clicking the button, like. Anyway, I'm not endorsing it. I'm just saying it seems like something you can find ways around. Jyoti, I want to thank you for coming on. That is Jyoti Mann, our Meta reporter here at The Information. That does it for today's show. A reminder, we are on this stream Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. If you can't make it then, episodes are available on theinformation.com, on our YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to follow us on social media, on X, Instagram, on TikTok, and on LinkedIn. I am already excited for our next show tomorrow. Have a great rest of your Wednesday. Bye-bye for now.